On today's show, a Rockets-Warriors crossover episode as only a half game separates these two teams for the final spot in the Western Conference play-in tournament. How did we get to this point in the season for both these respective organizations? Who ultimately wins out on their schedules? And the all-important April 4th meetup between these two teams to decide who likely gets that final play-in tournament spot. It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin. And the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer and making the show part of your day every single day. We're going to dive into my conversation with Locked On Warriors host Cyrus Saatsaz, a Rockets-Warriors crossover, as only a half game separates these two teams for the final spot in the Western Conference play-in tournament.
And the way this is going to work is I'm handling the host reins for the first segment. You take over the second one. We'll freewheel throughout this thing. The first things first, man, besides the fact that it's great to see you, how the hell are you doing? And how are you, like, in your opinion, are the Rockets going to overtake the Warriors? Let's start right off there, man. How are you feeling, and how are the Rockets fans feeling? And maybe how's the team feeling about this final stretch?
You know, Cyrus, I'll be completely honest, right? It was doom and gloom for a couple days there because the Rockets, they came out of the All-Star break and they had a bit of a rough stretch. They went kind of 1-4 for those first handful of games out of the All-Star break. Really competitive. They looked good in some of these games. They just couldn't quite get over the hump in a few of them. And then they kind of found something, right? They started playing this newfound level with new level of pace, really trying to kind of modify their offensive approach. They brought themselves back into the 21st century of NBA basketball by actually shooting more threes than their opponents in a number of games after playing this like old school, like 90s era basketball for 2/3 of the season. And then Alperen and Sengun went down, right? A really, what looked like a very scary injury at first against the Sacramento Kings. And Sengun has been their best player all season long. And obviously when your best player goes down due to injury and what looked like a really bad injury, thankfully he avoided any serious injury. He's, reportedly only going to be out for about a month, so he could potentially be back for a postseason run if the Rockets do make it into the actual playoffs. But as soon as he went down, it was kind of like it took all the wind out of the Rockets' sails, right? Where it was like, oh man, they finally found something. They were locking in. They had a little win streak going, and then your best player gets hurt. And I've kind of likened it to way back when the Rockets went on their 22-game win streak back in the Tracy McGrady, Yao Ming era. Yao Ming went down about halfway through that 22-game win streak, and everybody wrote off the Rockets. Everybody's like, oh, well, there goes the Rockets season. Here's another Yao Ming injury. Here it is again. And the Rockets tapped into something greater than themselves, right? Like sometimes you have these like unexplainable phenomena that take place in sports. And that's kind of what happened with this team where you lost your best player and it's like it galvanized them, right? Where they all came together. And now they're playing some of the best basketball of this season, right? The dynamic has changed considerably, moving Jabari Smith Jr. to that 5 spot. And at the core of all of this has been Jalen Green's sensational play. Jalen Green was arguably one of the worst players in basketball for about 2/3 of this season. And he went through the fire. He went through all the bumps and bruises along the road. Ime Udoka talked a lot about kind of tearing him down and building him back up as a player. And now we're seeing the fruits of that labor start to take hold, start to take effect, where Jalen's been one of the best players in the NBA for this stretch that the Rockets are on now. 9 straight wins, above 500 for the first time since all the way back in January. Longest win streak since the you'll be very familiar, obviously, with the James Harden, Chris Paul led Houston Rockets. And yeah, man, it's been really miraculous to see this team kind of come together and play some of the best basketball of the season here at the end and make a push for the play-in.
And, you brought up Ime Udoka, who I respect tremendously as a head coach. I mean, he gets results, right? I mean, it's really just one objective in competitive sports, and that's to win. The dude wins. He gets the best out of his players. The job he's done in Houston is miraculous. And then meanwhile, on the other side, you have Steve Kerr. These are two coaches and teams going in complete opposite directions. The Rockets are rising. You mentioned the big winning streak. Meanwhile, the Warriors, I believe they've lost 6 of their last 10, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, correct. From your perspective, and that's a huge reason why I love doing these crossovers. What's going on with the Warriors from your perspective, man? Like what do you see as an outsider? Because any Locked On Warriors everydayer knows what I've been saying for a long time, which is that Steve Kerr is playing favorites. He routinely is playing the wrong players instead of the best players. I just posted this stat on my Threads account. Again, you can follow me there at Dog Wild, listing all the team leaders for the Warriors in terms of net rating. The top 3 players for the Warriors: Podziemski plus 220, plus 221, Draymond Green plus 121, Jonathan Kuminga plus 108. The other side of that, the bottom 3, Kevon Looney minus 37, Klay Thompson minus 71, Andrew Wiggins minus 103. What is your perspective about the Warriors, man? Are they cooked? Are they done? What are you seeing that maybe I'm missing?
It's hard to say that the Warriors are going to be done, right? There's still such an absurd level of talent on that roster, and you have to almost give them the benefit of the doubt when they've been so dominant for such a very, very long time, right? All it takes is maybe the switch flips, right? And then you lock in and the big 3 start playing like they used to know how to play together. And I will say, it does at least feel like Steve Kerr is kind of leaning on the guys he thinks are supposed to be the guys that are able to produce at a high level, right? Leaning on the veterans, leaning on the guys who have been proven commodities in the past, but that has kind of, I think, in a way, blinded him to some of the success of some of the younger guys, right? Podziemski, Kuminga, and not really leaning into and highlighting, hey, these are guys that can help us win basketball games. I think one kind of interesting kind of when you compare the two coaches, right, between Steve Kerr and between Ime Udoka's not afraid to ride the hot hand. He doesn't care he will go with the best 5 guys on the court. Doesn't matter if it means he's benching, 2, 3, all 5 of his starters, whatever it is. He's going to roll with whoever he thinks gives him the best chance to win a basketball game, whether it's in a quarter, a half, an entire game, crunch time, whatever. We've seen Jalen Green benched. We've seen Sengun benched. We've seen Jabari benched. Doesn't matter. You're not going to get a chance just because of your name brand recognition or whatever. And it kind of sounds like that's what's happening with Kerr, where he's leaning on certain guys, even though they're not producing or even though they're struggling.
If Usman Garuba was coaching the Warriors, just to play off what you said, where Garuba is all about the hot hand, and rightfully so, right? I mean that's why wouldn't you do that? What do you think Usman? I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat and Usman Garuba's name popped up. Former Rocket, who has not seen virtually any playing time with the Warriors this year, much to my chagrin. What do you think if Ime Udoka was the head coach of the Warriors? What do you think he's doing differently versus Steve Kerr, if anything?
I think that one thing that Ime has really done is, first off, he's leaned into his, he's a very defensive minded coach. He's leaned into that defensive philosophy. In a way, he had to. It's hard to say what he would do with this Warriors team specifically, because with the Rockets, he needed to kind of establish an identity and a culture, because they didn't have that under Steven Silas. So he really tore things down to the nuts and bolts and tried to build it back up, because a lot of these guys, Jalen, Sengun for the first 2 years under Silas, Jabari and Tari last year, their rookie seasons, they didn't have structure. They didn't have an identity. And the way that it was always conveyed to me is, talking to, as other assistant coaches, agents, scouts around the league, is that this Rockets team was craving an identity. They were like a blank canvas, and Ime got to come in with his paintbrush and really establish what he wanted. And that was a defensive identity, right? And then as they kind of created that foundation early in the season, that's when they started to really expand post All-Star break and start to, lean into some of the, I guess, the gifts of the players on their roster, right? They've got some incredible athletes on this team, Jalen Green, Thompson, to name a couple of them, but they weren't playing with much pace, if at all, earlier this season, right? They were slowing things down. They were playing heavy in the half court, all those things. So it's hard to say what he would necessarily do differently with this Warriors roster, because they are an established veteran group, right? They've had success in the past. And maybe that's some of what Steve Kerr is kind of clinging to, is just some of the success that he's had in the past with these guys, trying to keep things the same rather than being innovative and leaning into some of these newer, younger names.
I'm totally with you, man. We're going to flip the script, and you're going to take over the hosting chair.
Absolutely, because we got to tell you guys about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because, Cyrus, it's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is so simple to play. You can make your picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 DFS app on the market. And it's demon time over at Prize Picks. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and promo code LOCKEDONNBA, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, Jackson?
I try not to.
Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting?
Thankfully, no, because I have a great alternative to Fox Sports, and that is our Locked On Sports Today channel. It's so good.
Absolutely. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sorry to take that. We didn't really script that part of it. And again, Jackson Gatlin is available on Twitter at JT Gatlin. You can follow me on Threads at Dog Wild. Jackson, take it away, sir.
All right, Cyrus. So here we are. We're at the tail end of the season. We've got 12 games left for the Warriors, 11 games left for the Rockets. And right now we have a half game separating these two for the final play-in spot in the Western Conference. For a little bit there, it looked like there was going to be kind of a 3-way race for the final 2 spots with the Lakers kind of in that mix as well. However, the Lakers kind of separating themselves from that 10-11 pack a little bit. It looks like they're kind of solidifying their spot right there as the 9th seed in the Western Conference. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to get much headway north or south from that position. So I think the Lakers are pretty much locked into that 9th spot. But as we said, again, Rockets just a half game back right now. The Warriors riding a 9-game win streak. The Warriors with a 2-game losing streak as it stands. And they've got a couple of tough games coming up here against the Miami Heat and the Orlando Magic, a little Florida road trip, and things are about to pick up for the Rockets. They had a really easy slate for these past couple of weeks, which is one of the reasons they've been able to have this 9-game win streak. But Cyrus, when we look at the standings as they are right now, for this, just kind of when you take kind of a 10,000-foot view on this Warriors season, is it like a crazy disappointment that you see them all the way down here at the 10th seed and trying to hold on for dear life to just make the play-in tournament as like a bottom of the barrel team? Is that a complete disappointment from the expectations coming to this season? How do you view where the Warriors are right now?
I say this whole season is a colossal disappointment. I even go back to the draft. And look, this is no disrespect to Brandon Pajemski. I do think that was a positive draft pick. I don't think that was a bad pick, but going back all the way to last summer when I saw Cam Whitmore just falling, this is a player who is projected to be a top 5 pick. And all of a sudden he's available to teams in the late teens, approaching 20. I was just completely flabbergasted that the Golden State Warriors just didn't even bother taking a look. And your team snagged him. He's having a phenomenal rookie season, especially given he's only 19 years old. So for me, it's like this whole season. I mean, this is the post Bob Myers era. It's been a colossal disappointment. Thankfully, Brandon Pajemski has at least proven himself to be a player in this game. His shooting still leaves a lot to be desired, but the tenacity, he's one of those irritants that usually if you're on the other side, you can see it. I always try to take the perspective of the opposing player and opposing team. And every time I do that, looking at Pajemski, I see myself getting annoyed. And I'm so thankful he's on my team. But with that said, the team just from the get-go, like this is Steve Kerr's vision, right? And Steve Kerr admitted 2 weeks ago in an interview with the San Francisco Chronicle with Sam Gordon that he makes tough decisions based on his gut. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm all about logic and reasoning. I'm all about if something makes sense, you do it. Speaking of the hot hand you mentioned with Ime Udoka, that makes sense. If someone is on fire, you play them. But that's not Steve Kerr's mentality. He's all about his gut. He's all about playing, the guys that he has proven themselves to be winners, as opposed to young players who might get there someday but haven't proven anything yet. But look, you got to play to prove yourself. And so I think looking at it right now, especially when you look at the rhetoric of Steve Kerr, he said this was a championship team. This is a team that could win the title. He's toned down that rhetoric a little bit. A month or two ago, he said, for example, that in regards to the play-in, that the Warriors are a team that could follow the Lakers model of last year because they were a play-in team who reached the Western Conference Finals. And so now you're talking about the Western Conference Finals. Championship is suddenly out of the vernacular. The point is, for this Warriors team to be where they are, and for this Warriors team to be stifling the growth of Moses Moody, who is a plus 50 this year in net rating. The team wins when he plays. For this team to still, at this stage, this late in the season, when you know with near certainty, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on Kuminga, because to me, there is no doubt he's the second best player on this roster, yet Steve Kerr will not finish games with him. He's still finishing games with Andrew Wiggins, who on the season is a minus 103. He's still finishing games with Klay Thompson, a minus 71, who's already who had his starter role revoked. But he's still finishing games with these guys over the players who are better, both in terms of measurable. I think they passed the eye test. So this season as a whole, where you've stunted the development of your young players, you're not winning with your veterans, you're still playing your veterans, even though you're no longer a championship team, which makes no sense. I'm frustrated. I'm completely just bewildered by all this. And yeah, I would say this is a colossal disappointment. But if you look at Steve Kerr's messaging, he still thinks there's hope. He still thinks I feel like his whole mentality is just get into the postseason and then anything could happen.
I feel like if you're Eric Spoelstra of the Miami Heat with, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and kind of that group, which the Heat have shown time and time again that when they get into the postseason, they do have like a switch that they can flip and just become a different team in the postseason. So I do think there is some merit to the idea of the regular season is what it is. We're not worried about it. We just want to get there, and then we'll be able to play our best basketball. I don't know if that necessarily applies to this Warriors team, and it definitely feels like, from an outsider's perspective, that this year feels like a huge indictment on Steve Kerr specifically as a coach, because I kind of thought that this Warriors team had kind of the ingredients to age out of the big three era, to age out of the Warriors dynasty era with a lot of grace and actually transition into the next era of Warriors basketball pretty seamlessly, right? With a lot of young talent, a lot of exciting young players. And it really feels like Steve Kerr has been just so adamantly opposed to doing that, where I really thought that this Warriors team was going to be very similar to the end of dynasty San Antonio Spurs, right? Think about the big three. Think about the end of that era and how Greg Popovich embraced and leaned into some of the young guys, namely, obviously, Kawhi Leonard, right? Yep. And really transitioned into that next era of Spurs basketball. Then now, obviously, Kawhi and his time in San Antonio ended, with fireworks, and it was not fun and it was a mess. But I do think that transition was incredibly seamless, where the Spurs did not have a drop off in play. In fact, they became a better team in the post big three era, where suddenly they had Kawhi, they had LaMarcus Aldridge, they were leaning into this new identity, they had the right pieces, and that was the sign of an organization that understood how to maintain greatness over an extended period of time. And the Warriors have been a dominant team. They've had this dynasty because in large part of the big three, and obviously Steph Curry's greatness, Clay, Dre, they've all been such important pieces, but it really feels like Steve Kerr's clinging on to that old identity and hasn't embraced a new version of this Warriors team, and that's where a lot of these struggles have come from, right?
You're absolutely right. And just to add to that, first of all, that Spurs team in 2017, almost any other year, they are by far the best team in the NBA. They just happen to be competing in the same season as the Kevin Durant Warriors.
Yeah.
That Spurs team was a juggernaut. It's incredible they didn't win a title. You're absolutely right. And regarding this Warriors team, here's the thing. You're absolutely right that the Warriors, with all the successful years, the championship years, they had the core three. They had other pieces, right? I mean, Wiggins for 6 months turned into an all-star for one of those title teams. You had Kevin Durant for 2 of those years. But the common theme for all of their title teams, except for maybe 2018, but they were so top-heavy, was depth. They had a team that their bench, you could go 10, 11 deep, and they often would, defying the norm of NBA teams that normally go 8, 9 maybe, right? Like the Warriors would go 10, 11, 12 deep in a lot of these years, including 2022. And Steve Kerr would rely on his bench. I saw the recipe this season as following that. And the Warriors currently right now are third in the NBA in bench scoring and net rating. They have a fantastic bench, but it's just oftentimes the Warriors are also the worst clutch team in the NBA. They're the worst fourth quarter team in the NBA. And I think the huge reason for that, we covered this a lot on Locked On Warriors, is Steve Kerr ultimately in these closing moments and in these pivotal moments keeps relying on his veterans who are just, they're cooked. And the why of that can be a myriad of reasons, whether it's age, the Wiggins thing. I mean, he's only 29, so that's a whole other story. But that core is just not delivering anymore. And Steve Kerr has had a hard time letting go. I keep bringing this argument up, and I'd love to maybe we could tease this when we come back before we lead into the April 4th game. But to me, the sign of Steve Kerr and why, in my opinion, he's overrated, and I hate bashing him, so I don't take joy in this, but it's just, you got to critique based on what's in front of us. If Steve Kerr, I'd love to get your answer to this when we come back. If Steve Kerr was the head coach of the Houston Rockets, what's the record? How are they doing this year? Jackson's going to answer that when we come back. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at betterhelp.com/lockedonnba and get on your way to being your best self. And Jackson, you and I have actually had conversations off the air about the value of therapy.
Absolutely.
And how your brain is your most important organ. And there's nothing wrong with seeking help for that, right? I mean, is there anything you want to add?
No, I've done therapy in the past. We've talked about this before, and it's an incredibly, cathartic experience to have somebody who's unbiased when it comes to your life kind of help, point some things out to you, share some things, right, and give you an unbiased opinion on some of the stuff that you're going through.
Absolutely. Giving you a fresh perspective, going through therapeutic methods and pathways to make yourself the best version that you can be. And it's okay to seek help. This is a hard world. There's a lot of variables that cause anxiety, that cause depression. It's okay to seek help, and BetterHelp is a fantastic resource for that. And they also save you time and money, which is possibly the two most important commodities that we have in this world. You save time because you don't have to drive to an office, and you save money because you don't have to spend gas to go to that office. BetterHelp is available virtually at home. So, and on top of everything else, you could also cycle through therapists to make sure you find the right fit for you. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Thank you for making Locked On Warriors and Locked On Rockets your first listen every day. For the everydayers, Jackson, when are you up next?
For the everydayers, our next episode, we're going to have this on our channel, but our next episode should be our recap of the Rockets on the road against the OKC Thunder. That's going to be their first really big barometer for the success that they've had as of late. 9-game winning streak, but against a lot of easier opponents. So we'll see how they perform against one of the Western Conference elite teams.
Absolutely. And we'll be back at this again. We're recording this on Tuesday at approximately 1:30 right now. We're back at this in a few hours. It's post-game of Warriors and Heat, a huge game for the Warriors. But I posed a question, Jackson, and I'd love to get your answer. If Steve Kerr was your head coach for the Houston Rockets instead of Ime Udoka, are the Rockets a half game out of the play-in? Are they better? Are they worse? Your thoughts?
I don't think so. But part of that is, I think it's twofold. I don't know what Kerr would look like with this team, because I honestly don't know. If you asked me to sit here and describe what is Kerr's identity as an NBA head coach, we haven't seen Steve Kerr without a future Hall of Fame cast at his disposal, right? We haven't seen Steve Kerr without Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and Kevin Durant for the couple of years that he was in Golden State. We haven't seen that version of Steve Kerr yet. So I really don't know what he would like. I feel like the mettle of a head coach is really tested when you have a team that isn't, chock full of star players, right? When you have a team that really needs elite coaching to be able to get them somewhere. And when you look at this Rockets team, they don't have any bona fide stars, right? Sengun had a breakout season. Obviously, he could have been a super, an all-star this season, didn't make the cut, but he was playing at an all-star level. Jalen Green was really rough for most of the season. Their marquee acquisitions were Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks. And yet Ime Udoka has this team a half game out of the play-in. Like, that speaks volumes about who he is as a head coach and what he was able to achieve and get out of this group of guys. So yeah, I feel pretty confident in saying that I don't think the Rockets would be where they are right now if Steve Kerr was the head coach, especially with like his just unwillingness to play young guys. Maybe that's just a Golden State thing. Maybe if he was with a different team, it would look a little bit different, but different expectations and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know, man. I'm
doing an episode coming up soon where I'm going to dedicate it entirely to Steve Kerr's gut. And I'm going to go through every decision he's made since because I go back to 2016 when, and more specifically, the first item I'm going to bring up on that episode were the adjustments the Warriors made up 3-1 against the Cavaliers when Draymond Green was suspended. I mean, my critique of him, I've never critiqued him publicly until last season. The 4 titles, I feel like earned him that right. But when I started seeing, and paying attention to the nuance of his decision-making last year, it's just a lot of stuff started to just stick out and stink. And, so I'm going to dedicate that episode soon to Steve Kerr's gut and where it has not necessarily led them in the right direction. But look, our teams have a big game coming up April 4th, and a huge reason why I feel like logically it would make sense to have this crossover between us right before that game. But the reason why I thought we should do it now is because only a half game separates our two teams. And more importantly, that game, even though it's just a week away, represents 5 games between now and then for the Warriors, 4 games between now and then for the Rockets. And the way this season has gone, you cannot predict where things are going to go, man. Like every time the Warriors, for example, look like they're on the right track and you're thinking big picture, like they could do anything, then they go through this slide where they lose 6 of 10. And your team, first of all, and backtracking real fast, you do have a star. Even though it's not technically a star yet, Jalen Green is on the cusp, my friend.
He's playing like a star now. And again, mentioned it in the open in our first segment. He's playing like a star level player now. He's been one of the best players in the NBA for about the last 3 weeks or so. But that's a new development, right? And again, credit to Ime Udoka for having the patience, for not abandoning ship when nobody would have blamed him, for benching Jalen Green earlier this season. We saw Jalen Green benched in a number of games at the end of fourth quarters because Ime just couldn't rely on him, right? He was struggling. He wasn't, where he needed to be on the defensive side of the floor. Offensively, he couldn't find a rhythm. It was really tough for him to adjust to playing winning basketball. But now that he's gone through that fire and come out on the other end, he is a significantly better player for that. And so you have to give Ime Udoka a lot of credit for not losing sight of the long-term vision of what he wanted to achieve with Jalen Green. But when we do look at the importance of this final game, Cyrus, first off, this game could be, it's going to feel like a playoff game because I don't think that the Rockets and Warriors, I don't think either team is going to create a ton of separation over these next 4 or 5 games before ultimately the Warriors come to visit the Rockets in Houston. I will say, though, one benefit for the Warriors is they've already won the season series regardless. So the Warriors won the first 2 meetups between these teams. They only play 3 times total this season. This is the final meetup between these 2 teams. So there's not a chance for the Rockets to tie the season series or win the season series, which absolutely plays into the favor of the Golden State Warriors here. Because if the 2 teams wind up with identical records at the end, Warriors have the tiebreaker, they're going to earn that play-in spot. Absolutely.
The Warriors play the Heat, the Magic, the Hornets, the Spurs, all on the road, and then they play a home game against the Mavericks before they travel again to Houston to take on your squad. Meanwhile, the Rockets are at OKC, at Utah, then they're at home against the Mavericks, and then they're on the road against the Timberwolves before that Warriors game. Where do you see them? Where do you see them in the standings? Are they going to be as tight now as they were then? What are you projecting?
I think with the way that this team has been playing and the way that they've kind of all come together as a unit, I wouldn't be shocked if they're able to at least go 2-2 over this next stretch of 4 games. They've got some really tough opponents in there, but they've also played OKC surprisingly well this season, even though OKC has been a really dominant team in the NBA this year. Now, again, a lot of this you have to say with the caveat of we haven't seen a lot of these teams play the Rockets without Alperen and Sengun. So all the games they played against OKC previously, they had Sengun in the lineup, and Sengun versus Chet Holmgren has been largely in favor of the Rockets up until this most recent meeting between the 2 teams where Chet Holmgren played out of his mind. But in the first 2 meetups, Alperen and Sengun got the better of Chet Holmgren. So I think that it's actually a benefit for the Rockets because a lot of teams, they don't have enough tape on the Rockets in the way that they're playing right now with Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5, with Amin Thompson inserted into the starting lineup. That kind of gives them a little bit of a sneaky advantage against certain teams because other coaches, they're looking at film and they're like, we don't know how this team is going to play against us now. They're playing at a much faster pace. They're getting out in transition a lot more. They're playing a lot. They're running a lot of their offense through Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet. They become a much more perimeter-oriented offense in the absence of Alperen Sengun. So I think that helps the Rockets considerably. But over these next 4 games, if they could go 2-2 and at least go 500 over these next 4 before that Warriors game happens, then I think they're going to be in a really good spot. How do you feel about the Warriors 5 games before they get to their fated little date with destiny in Houston?
They're borderline unpredictable at this point. I mean, I don't feel good about either of these next 2 road games at Miami, at Orlando. I don't feel good about that at all. The Hornets is the only opponent I do feel confident with. I mean, even the Spurs don't feel like a gimme, because the Spurs, I think, beat the Warriors last time they played. And we're now seeing, one of the future of the NBA rising for that squad, and he's playing much better than he was early in the season. I'm really worried about this Warriors team, man. I mean, I feel like if you believe in intuition, I guess, if you just believe that pieces fall where they may, the Warriors will get the 10 seed. But, if things were scripted, I guess is the best way I can describe it. I feel like if the NBA was scripting this whole thing, they'd put the Warriors in, but it's not scripted. And on paper, your team looks so dangerous. Do you ever? I know we only have a couple seconds here, but I'm sure you've heard of the Ewing theory, which implies that sometimes when the team's best player is injured or removed, the team actually is better.
Yeah.
Have you discussed that with the Rockets and Sengun? Like, do you think they're a better team without them because they're faster? I think
no. They already started picking up the pace with Sengun in the lineup post All-Star break. That was an emphasis of Ime Udoka coming out of the All-Star break, and we saw them playing with more pace. We've also seen them anchor down a top 10 defense. I think they drifted off to about 7th or 8th in defensive rating, but Sengun has been a part of a top 10 defense all year long. So the argument that this team is somehow magically better without their best player, they're not. They've leaned into a different identity, absolutely, and that helps when you replace one really good player with Jalen Green, who suddenly started playing like a superstar player and has been averaging 30 plus a game over this little recent winning streak that the Rockets are on. So that's been incredible to see. But no, this is not a better team without Alperen and Sengun, and that's a narrative that I've had to debunk multiple times over at Locked On Rockets. But Cyrus, when we look at this game, right, I don't think either team is going to create a mountain of separation. I think they're actually still, I would wager that they're still going to be within, I'd say, at least a game of each other. Either way, whether the Rockets leapfrog the Warriors and they're holding that 10 seed for a little bit, or maybe they're still hovering right behind the Warriors. I think they're still going to be within about a game of each other by the time their matchup ultimately happens on April 4th in Houston. The way that I'm feeling, though, man, is, and I've said this before over at my show, is something about it screams, right? You want to talk about like karmic retribution, whatever. Something about it screams like poetry to me, where if the young Houston Rockets were able to like usher in this new age of basketball by knocking out like the Warriors at the end of their Big Three dynasty and Steve Kerr and all that, something about it is a little poetic, right? When you think about the way that the Warriors were the direct roadblock and preventing the James Harden-led Rockets from winning titles for a few years there.
I know you're right.
I need my retribution, man.
You're still thinking of that. I get it. That's sports, right? I mean, some of my most painful memories, going back to our sponsor, BetterHelp, just a few moments ago, some of the most painful memories are sports related, man. I feel you. I get it. So a different sport, but the 49ers, I mean, I don't think they're ever going to be Patrick Mahomes, and that sucks. So the Niner fans always look at the Chiefs, I think, the same way the Rockets fans look at the Warriors. But I will say this, man, the Warriors are facing an existential crisis right now, because if your Rockets surpass them, and this does become a reality where the Rockets are in and the Warriors are out, I mean, I don't see
what do you do if you're the Warriors? Yeah, what do you do at that point?
Blow it up. I think you have to blow it up. How do you come back when your injuries are not the cause of this, right? It's just your best players are cooked. And you have some rising young players who should be playing right now, but they're not getting these important reps, which is needed for development. So, finishing up predictions.
Wait, we'll do the predictions, and I've got one final question for you because I'm so curious. We'll do predictions, and then I've got one final one. So
perfect. So
predictions for the game. I'm gonna say it's gonna be a nail biter, and I'm gonna be the homer here. I think the Rockets come out on top. I'm tempted. I'm not going to put a final score on it yet, because the Rockets have been playing at an insane pace as of late. So it could be something where we see, a final score in the like 120s range or whatever. But if Jalen Green can keep up his current level of play, I don't see a way that this team loses, because they've been one of the best defenses in the NBA. They've switched with Jabari at the 5. They're a switch everything scheme 1 through 5. I think they match up incredibly well with the Warriors. So that's going to be my prediction for this game.
Jabari Smith is rising. Your team, I'm so envious of your team because on one hand, the Warriors do have great young pieces themselves, but you're the potential level for the Rockets with Jalen Green, with one of the Thompson twins, Jabari Smith, who is really coming into his own. I'm envious, man. I will say this. I'll roll with you in your prediction for the Warriors Rockets. I think Houston wins that game at home, but I think the Warriors will hang on and get into the playoffs only because of that tiebreaker. That tiebreaker to me is going to.
You think they finish with the identical record and the tiebreaker is what separates
with identical records? Because right now the Warriors lead by 1 in the loss column. I think they'll finish with identical records, but I also think that the Warriors will sneak in. However, speaking of it being poetic, the Rockets are going to be, regardless of what happens, your offseason is roses. It's
the Rockets they've already won,
yeah.
Right? Regardless of how the season finishes, whether they make the play-in or not, this season has been a monumental success. To go from 22 wins to fighting for the final play-in spot in the Western Conference is a huge W, no matter what way you slice it. The Rockets are looking like they're going to hit 40 wins at a minimum, it feels like, at this point, and going from 22 wins to 40 wins is a huge improvement. Ime Udoka, I think, has to be in the conversation for Coach of the Year. Not that he's going to win the award,
but just win. He should win.
I don't know. I think that honor probably falls with Mark Daigneault or Chris Finch with the Timberwolves and Thunder. Personally, I'm not going to be too much of a homer here, but I think Ime should at least be in the conversation. It should be a finalist for the award. But when it comes to coaching, and this is the final question that I want to leave you with, and I'm sure you're going to have to unpack this on a future show. You talked about if the Warriors do get bounced, right? If they don't make it to the play-in tournament, if they finish the 11th seed in the Western Conference, do you blow it up, or do you simply try changing head coaches and seeing what happens? Because I think that, when you look on paper at this Warriors team, they shouldn't be where they are. And I think a lot of the frustrations from this year can be you can point to and attribute them to Steve Kerr. So if you're the Warriors, do you maybe try changing up the head coaching department to see if you can still be a competitive team next year with this current core, maybe a coach that leans into some of the younger identities a little bit more, or do you just straight up blow it up and see what you can get for all the pieces? Although I'm assuming you want Steph Curry to retire, or you want him to be a lifer.
Easily. I don't mind the aspiration of the big three retiring together, but they're clearly not going to carry this thing moving forward.
Yeah.
Look, if you're asking me what I would do if I was the GM, yes, I would get rid of Kerr. I would have gotten rid of Kerr last year. But pragmatism has to come into play, and that includes Joe Lacob's relationship with Steve Kerr and the whole dynamic. One of the huge reasons why Steve Kerr got the extension and why he's not going anywhere, I don't think, at least not this offseason and near the start of next season, is because of Draymond Green. Draymond Green is a very difficult player to manage and coach, and that's almost single-handedly the reason why Steve Kerr is still here, because him and Steph, right? Steph loves him as well. So his wishes are taken into consideration also. But I think that's overblown. Like Steph's love for Steve Kerr, I do think people overblow that in terms of Steve Kerr's job security. Like Kerr is not safe just because of Steph. Like they will make a change if things continue in this trajectory. But I also think Steve Kerr will get most likely one more year. My guess is he'll make the argument, and he'll have a discussion with Joe Lacob. Joe Lacob loves to win, and I'm eternally grateful that the Warriors have an owner like him. Who doesn't like to just sit on his laurels when the team is not successful. He wants to win, and he's got that in his blood, and I love that so much. So he can't be happy with all this. Like he cannot be. And it was very evident in the fact that he attended a Steve Kerr press conference earlier this year following the game where they lost to the Nuggets. They blew this huge leads. Jonathan Kuminga didn't play the final 18 minutes of that game, and Joe Lacob showed up in the post-game press conference interview room to hear Steve Kerr's answer that regarding why Kuminga didn't play those final 18 minutes. Kuminga is Joe Lacob's boy. So when he doesn't play, it definitely raises antennas on Joe Lacob's head. But with that said, I do think Kerr gets one more year. If they don't make the playoffs again, I just haven't put enough thought into what happens there. But logically speaking, you have to blow it up. I don't know how you keep it together. Klay Thompson's an unrestricted free agent. You got to deal with that. But
we've got a lot of ground to cover between now and then, though. There's still 11, 12 games left of the season. So whether or not the Warriors are going to have to blow it up, that's a conversation. That's definitely some off-season content that I know you're going to cover. What the Rockets are going to do, regardless of whether or not they make the play-in, I'm going to have you guys covered for all the Rockets musings over at Locked On Rockets. But Cyrus, we're on your channel, your program. You take us away, man.
Both. We're on both, man. Locked On Rockets is live too. The crossovers are fun, man. I love doing this. Thank you so much for saying yes to this. Again, this is a delight, and congrats on your team, man. If in case people were hoping for more of a more tension between us, a more conflicted program with two hosts battling it out, I have too much respect for Jackson, but also,
it's
even
all
though the
love
Rockets
here.
and Warriors are rivals, your team looks good, man. I don't have much to hate on. The only weakness I feel like you guys have is inexperience. That's it. And once you get that part down, you're going to be dangerous. So congrats, Rockets fans. You have my respect because your team looks good. And for Warriors fans, I'm with you. We're anxious. We're an anxious bunch. We're a borderline freaked out bunch. We'll see how it goes. But Jackson, thanks for doing this, brother. This was incredibly fun on my end as well. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.